أنتقل لسؤالي إلى السيدة إيفا. برأيكم ما هي أبرز الفرص المتاحة حالياً لتوسيع استخدام القروض السيادية في تمويل مشاريع البنى التحتية؟ ما هي القطاعات الواعدة اللي ممكن تستفيد أكثر شيء من هذه التمويلات اللي تقدمها الحكومة؟
Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today, also for the organizers to having invited me. In the framework of the Sovereign Guarantee Initiative, and this is not the only one how export credit agencies or short ECAs work in Iraq and in other countries, we have also programs going directly with the sovereign sector or the public sector. It opens the door to the private sector companies, as we know. And in this case, it is actually also given by the government which focus sectors there are, including petrochemicals and chemicals, medicine and pharmacy, agriculture, construction. I'm sure I'm missing some, but I'm sure it's also been mentioned before. So those are particularly the ones that are in focus now and also given by the Iraqi government, knowing where the needs are in terms of financing and in terms of industrialization and increasing production chances.
سؤالي الآخر هو حسب الأخبار أنه هناك عندكم مذكرة تعاون مع المصرف العراقي للتجارة. ما مدى اعتمادكم على القروض السيادية في تمويل المشاريع داخل العراق؟ كيف تضمنون التوازن بين التحقيق الأثر التنموي الاقتصادي وأيضا بين أنه تكونون هناك أكو إدارة مخاطر ممكن تكون بنفس الوقت؟
Yes, we signed last year in June a memorandum of cooperation with the Trade Bank of Iraq as a vehicle for the Sovereign Guarantee Initiative. We'll see how that goes now as private banks are also introduced. And that's something we also welcome because it gives also a more competitive chance to other banks. It has, on the one hand, a commercial component. Export credit agencies don't necessarily have a developmental aspect, like primarily. It is actually something to enhance, yes, the bilateral relationships between two countries on the one hand, and also support their own export credit or export industry, opening the doors for this market that they usually wouldn't go so easily into or would have difficulty going into. Nevertheless, it does have developmental, if you wish to say, put it that way, aspects, as were mentioned before, in terms of bringing standards of the international banking and finance world that we apply and under which we look at different projects and whether they are, from our perspective, coverable and from the perspective of banks, financeable. And that raises the standard, and hopefully once we have reached a certain level and done a few projects, also the local banks as well as the companies of Iraq have reached a certain understanding and have reached a certain level in whether it comes to financial reporting and other ways to actually access the international banking market directly. So it is a step towards, in many countries, step towards a more open financing market.
هل وجود الضمانات السيادية ممكن تساهم جذب البنوك الدولية للمشاركة بالمشاريع؟ كيف ممكن تقيمون هذا الشيء على المدى الطويل؟ هل هناك استدامة من هذه الخطوة؟
Yes, actually, it has benefits on multiple levels. On the one hand, of course, importers, exporters coming together and finding an opportunity rather than going via LCs or direct cash payment to materialize or to implement projects and also implement projects, we should say, in a significant amount of money. And not just limit that to small machinery here and there, but rather proper production lines. It has also benefits. I was focusing earlier in my answer a little bit more on sort of the exporters and opening the markets to them. Of course, that's one element. The other is, of course, when we talk about the financing. At current, I know of, let's just say, very few international banks who would be willing to straightforwardly lend into Iraq. And so it opens the door to give access to financing to Iraqi investors, to the Iraqi market. And maybe let me just take a small step back because I'm not sure how familiar the audience is. I cannot explain the full structure to you, but it is basically, because we're talking banks and we have Iraqi banks here, we talk about international banks. It is actually a structure whereby you have the Iraqi investor come to an agreement with an exporter, the Iraqi investor goes to TBI or to a private bank here, gets the approval, will get the loan from that particular bank, and that particular bank turns around and gets the loan from an international bank. That international bank comes to us as an export credit agency to insure themselves. Not only do they get Ministry of Finance guarantee, but also the guarantee from us as a government. Export credit guarantees are government instruments. So it is both the, in our case, German government and the Iraqi government supporting this transaction, thereby also taking away not only commercial risks for the bank, but also the political risks that could come up with, I don't know, change of government, all the things that we have seen and unfortunately happen in the world. And so it really is a very well-suited instrument to bring to fruition a number of goals.
كرر سؤالي اللي سألته للضيوف، ما هي من وجهة نظركم أكثر القطاعات جاهزية أو ممكن هي بحاجة لهذا النوع من التمويل؟ أكثر القطاعات حاجة للتمويل.
I mean, we mentioned earlier the power sector. Of course, I see that more from a government entity right now, or government supported government financings with the Ministry of Electricity. Of course, in the private sector, and included in that with the projects, sometimes we have the power element. So that can also come into the sovereign guarantee initiative. That is, of course, when we talk about industrialization, you have to have a reliable source of electricity. That's the basics, basically. And then there's so many other, and I find that actually highly interesting in my work and looking into this right now, to really learn more about Iraq and where this has come from, and like through to certain sanctions times when there was no sugar, and now then you have like producers that use sugar in their products. They were able to build up a little bit over the, say, after the 90s there's embargo, and then or in the 80s was embargo, and then they moved on, but then they never fully picked up, and it was somehow replaced from imports from neighboring countries, and you can't compete with them with the old machinery. So now it opens the door to say, let's look at this, let's bring this production back home, so to speak, to Iraq, and not use so many imports. So I wouldn't want to sort of pull forward one of the industries, because I think there's a whole kaleidoscope of opportunity out there.
واضح، شكرا جزيلا.